Hello, everyone. This is Joyelle Brandt here with Emily Reed Daniels. We are going to be chatting today about parenting with PTSD. So I'm here from Parenting with PTSD online. You know our book and our website. And my partner, Dawn, and I have been working with Emily on developing an amazing Parenting with PTSD workshop that Emily and Dawn will be presenting in a few weeks. So I'm going to read you a little bit of Emily's bio. We're going to talk about the work that she does, and then we're going to jump into some of the material that they will be covering in their upcoming Parenting with PTSD workshop. So let me tell you about Emily. Emily Reed Daniels has 20 years experience working with vulnerable youth. She holds a Master's of Education in School Counseling and a Master's of Business Administration in Organizational Sustainability. She is a nationally certified counselor and a somatic experiencing practitioner in training. She is a trained Reiki practitioner and trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction. Much of Daniel's career has been spent as a public educator and school counselor, developing programs and interventions to serve challenging students and hardworking staff. In June of 2017, she resigned her position as a student assistance counselor to launch her own business as a consultant to school districts. Her business, Hear This Now, provides technical assistance to those seeking to become trauma-informed. So
Thanks,
what
Joelle.
I wanted to start with is, Emily, tell me, what does that mean? How do you help schools and school districts become trauma-informed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's actually a really big question because there's many layers to becoming trauma-informed. So I always say to folks that it's a journey. And it's a process. It's not like a one-time event. But to me, being trauma-informed means understanding the role of the body in human behavior and the role of physiology and how that plays a part in terms of, you know, in our earlier lived experiences, our bodies are calibrated and our stress response systems are calibrated to react or respond to perceived threats in our environment. So becoming trauma-informed is a lens that helps us to reinterpret not only challenging student behaviors, but also challenging behaviors from staff and from colleagues. And you know, having worked in schools for many, many years and always working with the most challenging of students, it was a breath of fresh air when I sort of finally came to this science and came to this understanding because for me, it sort of validated what I always believed, which is that with those really powerful reactions in humans, we're not in control of that in the moment. But for a very long time in education, we have wanted to frankly blame and shame kids for the ways in which they behave, especially when their behaviors are particularly challenging. So to me, this movement is about, or the trauma-informed change is really about viewing human behavior in a very different way and helping folks to connect and to create safety in and out of the classroom. So that's part of what I help people do.
And I'm sure you found this too in your work. When I did work recently, I was doing a workshop on trauma-informed care for people who work in various healthcare and mental health. And I thought we would spend most of the time talking about their clients, their patients that they work with. But I found in the course of the workshop that a lot of the time was actually spent talking about their own histories and how we really have to unpack our own trauma reactions before we can even look outside into, you know, so as an educator, you have to look at your own trauma reactions before you can look at what's happening with your students. I'm sure you've probably seen that too.
Absolutely. And in fact, I've developed my own model for trauma-informed teaching called the regulated classroom. And it's exactly based on that premise that if you really want to assist students in their own stress reactions, you have to begin within your own self, meaning that an acknowledgement and awareness of what's happening in our own bodies as we encounter folks that are, well, whether it's kids or peers that are challenging in and of themselves, because there's a dynamic interplay that happens in the social experience and in any social experience, whether that's in schools or in your workplace or at home in your family. So if people are reacting, our own bodies are going to react to that as well. So it absolutely has to begin with do you understand your own sort of triggers and what gets your stress system activated and possibly bumps you out of your verbal filter realm, I like to call it, which, it could be even worse than that. Behaviors can even be more challenging than just people losing their verbal filter. But, it's interesting to me how much I was experiencing that personally. It's part of the reason why I left the work that I was doing in direct service, was just, I was getting so burned out, and I was not, and, it wasn't because I didn't have caring folks around me. Like, I was fortunate enough to have a very caring boss and department. But people don't understand that it's more than just relationships that we need in order to help repair cumulative stress response in the body. So, and I can tell you right now that it is not happening the way it needs to be happening in clinical practices or school settings, healthcare settings. No, we don't take care of one another. We don't have systems in place to know how to care for one another and to even acknowledge the amount that stress will recalibrate your own physiology. So it's a big piece of things.
Yeah, and Dawn and I have the goal at Parenting with PTSD to help build trauma-informed families. And for us, it really started with what you were talking about with identifying triggers. That was our launching point, was let's get curious about what are common triggers for parents who are survivors of childhood abuse. And I was starting to become aware of my own personal triggers, and it really opened up a whole new way of looking at my entire life history when I started to look back and all of those moments when I had judged myself as being too sensitive or irrational or just that, thinking that there's something horribly wrong with me. Now I was able to look back at my history, and those moments were moments when I was triggered into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And now I can look back and understand that, well, IKEA, as much as I love their furniture and half of it in my home, I should never go to IKEA. There are just certain environments that will be huge triggers for me and cause this crazy stress response. And I say crazy, and I actually wish I could take that word back, because I think that's what I've called myself. And a lot of us who are survivors have called themselves for a really long time as crazy, because we think that we're so irrational. But when we understand how the brain works and how early childhood trauma impacts the brain, then we can understand these stress responses as perfectly normal reactions to what has happened. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, about how trauma impacts the brain when we have early trauma?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, Joelle. But I appreciate your point. It's a very important point for us to understand. And it's so funny because I'm listening to you speak about the judgments that you had when you found yourself reacting in moments with your own children, probably not just with your own children, but about just feeling that loss of control and feeling so ashamed about it. And it's a pretty powerful body experience, visceral experience. And I am really in this moment right now where I'm nerding out in a big way with Stephen Porges's work around the polyvagal theory in the realm of social engagement. And he has a term, and again, I'm just going to go clinical for a second here, but because I think it's very much relevant to what you're describing and to like a lack of awareness on our part as human beings. And so he uses this term, one of the terms he uses is something called interoception, which is this. It's essentially that, like, we've always acknowledged that we have five senses, smell, taste, touch, sight. Can't think of the other one right now, but and those are exterior to the body. But the body actually has, and it's a much more vital sense early in life. We're born with this capacity. Actually, it even exists in utero. And it's this idea of interoception, which is that our inner organs are directly, the nerves that are connecting our inner organs to our brainstem are there to help us interpret whether or not we need to be, exercising reactions. This is, of course, at a subconscious or unconscious level to keep us protected. So when you have early childhood trauma, at a very basic level, and people have said this for years, like, oh, if bad things happened to you as a child, it didn't affect you because you didn't remember it. That's total BS, like 110%. In fact, if you had it early in life, if you had a chaotic home environment, or you were subject to neglect or abuse of different kinds, your body is definitely carrying that. Because it was a threat to your survival in very basic ways. And so the way in which we may know that now as adults is by being able to develop awareness about what's happening within our bodies. And so that's why in somatic experiencing, it's the language of sensation. It's that, and I know, and like when I found this whole body of work, I was like, oh my God, finally somebody is talking about like that inner, I used to just call it like that inner, like, ugh, that, like there's so many feelings that are actually very powerful visceral experiences, whether that's that dread that just hangs in your gut, or that like anxiety that might like carbonate your chest, or like the tension that you get, in your shoulders. That's all, and that's the capacity to know that that's happening for you is the capacity to be in touch with your interoception. And so it's your inner experience, it's your inner state. And the body, when our kids do things, frankly, I'm going to be really honest and just say that right now I'm having a very challenging experience myself with my 11-year-old daughter, who I have raised a lot like me. But she is developmentally at a stage right now where she is super challenging, and it gets my inner experience really activated. And so I found myself the other day just trying to, as she was talking, trying to actually notice what was happening in my belly, because I could tell that I was right on that cusp of the fight response. And I would not have even known to be in touch with that prior to all this study and this talk about the body experience and the body's memory. So that's what, Don and I and you, and that's what I'm hoping we're going to bring to this particular workshop offering, is just an integration of understanding that we are biological creatures and we have a biological essence that is designed to be adaptive. And it was for a period of time. And now as we try to parent our children, it can also be the thing that makes us, sort of a threat to our kids. It's really challenging stuff. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's really interesting what you were saying about learning to tune into the body cues that are happening, but right before you feel like I'm about to lose it here and hop into fight, flight, freeze mode. Because I think for most of us, we're not getting that there's anything happening in there. It feels like you're kind of like you're just going on your normal day, and then all of a sudden you lose it. And it takes time and practice to learn to tune into those body cues and to see what's happening inside of yourself before you get to that point. And the whole brain-body connection, I think this is a really important one to talk about, because there's been a real time.
You're delaying a few times and stopping there a few times, so I apologize if I'm not responding. I can't tell if you're talking still or not talking still.
Oh, sorry.
So you were talking. That's okay. I heard you say that you think it's interesting about trying to get in touch with that body experience that's happening right before the fight response. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, because most of us growing up, we're told some variation of "it's all in your head," right?
Exactly. And well, it's not just when we're growing up, it's still happening today.
Yes.
We have this, the movement of positive psychology made us sort of double down in that cognitive arena and believe that we could just think ourselves out of our negative reactions, that if we just had enough will or enough discipline or enough like reframing of the problem, that we would be the better parent. It's just not, I wish that were true. I really do. Believe me. And I tried it, and I've tried it and I preached it and the whole thing, but it never was really right in my body, never really sat right in my body. And, I've definitely had many, many moments as a parent that aren't proud moments. And I know, and like, this is what I did for a living. This is what I studied. This is what I understood. So, and I've had tons of therapy. So, I once I found this whole concept of, really the somatic experience, then I understood better that there are certain things that are very difficult to remain in control of. So the idea, and that's the thing about this particular workshop, it's just a little bit of a taste of this kind of way of thinking and understanding stuff, because here's what it does for us.
Mm-hmm.
It opens up a broader understanding of the journey of healing. And, one of the indicators that various researchers have used, this includes Stephen Porges and Bessel van der Kolk and those kind of folks, one of the indicators that they have used of how do you help a nervous system be less reactive? So basically, how do you help an individual not be so stress reactive or not be so easily triggered? That would be the language, in what we've been talking about. And so they use this indicator of heart rate variability, which is this idea that essentially, there's an extenuation, there's a broadening of range of activation and settling within your nervous system. So what that means is that when you encounter something your body perceives as a threat, you have a bigger range to work with that doesn't kick you into those fight, flight responses or freeze responses so easily. Right. And that really comes from, truthfully, that comes from things like movement and rhythm and ritual and ceremony, and it's different for different people, but that's where we start to understand the wisdom of the East and so much of what they've done, or even tribal communities and indigenous people. Like those folks didn't go to therapists 200, 300,000 years ago. They had ways in which that they related that supported healing in the body. And we, as Western, in our Western ways, we've gotten so far away from that. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's kind of
for myself, because I am an artist and a musician, and I've relied personally on that to save my life countless times. Yes. And our culture, unfortunately, devalues the arts, to the point where our schools are, most of them, seriously lacking funding for the arts. And that is so tragic, because you don't understand how many people's lives have been saved by being able to sit down and write or paint or sing a song or dance and help process that experience that, as we've been talking about, is literally inside your body. And, and I wanted to share a funny moment where I really got the full brain-body connection. Recently, I had to go last year for, I was having issues with my throat, and I was sitting in the ear, nose, throat doctor's office waiting to go in. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that in order to check my throat, he was going to have to put a tube down my nose. And
oh my God.
Instantaneously, I got a nosebleed, which I have never once had in my entire life. Never had a nosebleed before. And it was such a funny moment of me of connecting about just how truly interconnected and interinformed the brain and body are. And how often we discount these things and don't realize the severe impact that interplay can cause in our lives. So.
Yeah. It's huge. It's so incredibly powerful. And I think one of the, that's an excellent illustration that you just, little anecdote that you just used, because one of the things, and I know this from my own training, that, we used to say, used to listen to me, people still say these things, that things like, irritable bowel syndrome or, fibromyalgia, or that a lot of those sort of diagnosed medical conditions that were difficult to identify the cause of, that they were really somatic illnesses. That's literally the word that was even used for them. And really what that meant in the clinical world was, a person's got something stuck in their head and they're basically making themselves sick from what's stuck in their head.
Right.
And it's like, no, they are actually sick. But I think about, irritable bowel syndrome, which I was diagnosed with in my mid-20s. And, I now can so clearly see that, like, think about the nerves that innervate sort of my intestine. And, I was so easily triggered in my mid 20s with everything in my life, truthfully, that it was no wonder that I was constantly having irritable bowel symptoms, because my body was trying to rid things because it thought it was in need of, it was in survival mode, thought it was in need of protecting me. And that's what it was doing. It wasn't that I conjured that in my head. It was actually like, that was what my body thought I needed to be doing in order to keep me primed for survival. So it's incredibly powerful what the body will do, and in a moment can be very adaptive. But it's that chronic, activation of that same system that just really will make us quite diseased and ill.
Yes.
And you want to know what's funny about that? The person who eventually healed me of lockjaw, irritable bowel syndrome, plantar's warts, these were all things that I was getting sort of in a cluster of symptoms in my mid-20s. My foot doctor, my podiatrist, finally, after burning out and cutting out and doing all those things to try to get rid of plantar's warts, finally sent me to a homeopath. And that homeopath was able to heal me because he understood the integration. He asked me all about my ACEs. He was the first doctor who even thought to even consider, well, what's your lived history been? And saw these things in not as silos, not as like, oh, you need to be the foot doctor, you need to be the gastroenterologist, or you need to be, he saw these things as all in, you need to go to the TJM specialist or whatever. Nope, he got it. Right. So, I've been really fortunate in my journey of healing to have encountered lots of different kinds of folks to help me. But many of us don't have that experience,
Yes. So for those who are not familiar, Emily is referring to the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, which showed that the higher number of early trauma that you experience on a scale of 0 to 10, different kinds of trauma, including physical and sexual abuse, including living with a family member who had mental illness, having a family member incarcerated, neglect, all of these sorts of things. So the study found that there were serious long-term health consequences that proportionally increased with the number of adverse childhood experiences you had had. And most of our healthcare system currently does not acknowledge the importance of ACEs, unfortunately. And also very significant is that most of the healing modalities that are successful for people who are struggling with these issues are ones that are not covered by basic medical insurance.
That's correct.
So the people who get to have access to what they need in order to heal are the ones who are financially better off, and the ones who do not have those financial skills are never able to access the tools that we know are incredibly effective.
That's exactly right. And I was really fortunate at that time because the doctor, the homeopath I went to was a trained MD. And so he had actually left traditional medicine to pursue homeopathy because he wanted to be able to see people's wellness in a bigger, more comprehensive light. So he actually was able to still charge my insurance for my treatment, which was phenomenal. Dr. Robert Hall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Anybody wants him, and he doesn't know I'm plugging him, but he was phenomenal. He was phenomenal, and I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity. But you're absolutely right, Joelle. It's so not right how much is not yet covered, and we're kind of in a, we're really in a time and a place where we're really up against some serious interests in keeping the system as it is, which isn't health promoting or well-being promoting or healing promoting. That would be a best way to put it.
And for anybody who would like to learn more about this topic, we both highly recommend The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Harris. It's a fantastic book that talks about how we can change our health system to better reflect what we know about ACEs and the impact of ACEs on health over a lifetime.
Yeah. Sorry, we're really far off topic. But this is good conversation.
Let's bring it back in now. And I know we've covered a lot of different topics here. To the topic that Emily and Don will be speaking about, you've got a workshop coming up on June 28th.
Yes. Yep. Here in Hancock, New Hampshire, which is very, very far from you. But it's sort of our pilot, it's our little pilot offering to see how it goes. I think it'll actually go quite well. And we have several folks attending from different parts of the state of New Hampshire. And it's interesting because it's actually gotten to some of our Department of Youth and Family Services. So we're going to have some of those folks here, which is in our state, that's the Department of Health and Human Services. And I think we're going to have a lot of people that are sort of lived experience / doing the work, kind of like me, you, and Dawn. And I think, those are the most fruitful kinds of gatherings when we get to be with people who aren't just speaking with a professional, cap on, but they also have lived the experience so they understand. And I'm really hopeful that people will see this as being different, because I know that all of us have put a lot of intention into trying to design something that felt very supportive, and also egalitarian, for lack of a better word, meaning that, Don and I aren't showing up as the experts. We're showing up there as people who have something to share with others and want to hear and engage them in their lived experience. And then I also intend to share with folks just what are practices of regulation. So what are practices of healing? And they don't have to be clinical, and they don't have to be overly new agey either, for lack of a better word. It's very simple stuff. It's very, I was just saying this to a girlfriend this morning, that people want to make this, some people in this field want to make this like rocket science, but really it's not. It's not. Right. You're looking to create safety for people, and that comes when you're very intentional about making language equal and not power over. That right there is regulating to a lot of people. Yes. And so, a lot of parenting education has really been a power over kind of tone, because it's like, let me tell you what you need to do to be a good parent, and here are the things. Yes. And those kinds of tips have their place, like read to your kid every night. Like, so maybe people don't know that or something, but these other pieces about like being patient and setting boundaries and dealing with discipline, these other issues, the way in which we're engaged in those conversations, it just feels very like, condescending. And so I think that this will be a really different experience for folks, because it's going to be helping people hopefully get in touch more with what's going on for them internally, and an acknowledgement and normalization of that, and a recognition of it, that that you are the way you are for a reason. And here's ways in which let's just engage together a little bit in some things that may give you a different interstate experience. And from there, where might you go with that? So it's not at all talking about the nuts and bolts of being a good parent. It's about what's your lived experience in your body, and how does that play out even in an experience of talking about being a parent? You know what I mean?
Yes. So, yes. Before we can talk about becoming the kinds of parents that we really want to be, we have to have the conversation about what's getting in the way.
Yes, exactly. And it has to be done with a lot of psychological safety, because otherwise that can quickly feel like a blaming, shaming conversation. So, I think I'm really just thrilled to be doing this with you and Dawn, and to be offering it with Dawn on the 28th. I think it's going to be great.
I think it will too. And I think it will really start to change the conversation here about how do we talk about parenting, and that, like you were saying, it has to start with empathy and compassion for the parent themselves and for their personal struggles, before we start saying to them, well, here's all the list of 10 things that you're supposed to be doing right now, because the last thing we need is one more thing to be shamed about.
Exactly.
Parenting
exactly.
are already struggling with so much deep shame.
Mm-hmm.
That has been passed down because of the abuse that they experience. And what we need is a lot more compassion. And like you said, really making sure that initiatives that are designed to help parents who are survivors of trauma are being delivered by peers,
mm-hmm.
by people who have that lived experience, as opposed to being talked down to
mm-hmm.
by an expert. Because again, like you were saying, that really is in and of itself very triggering for somebody who and we just have to look at let's decompress that, or let's take that apart, because when you were abused by the people who were in charge of your well-being, which most childhood abuse survivors have been, anyone who is in a position of authority is going to automatically make you feel unsafe.
Exactly.
So when we're approaching people like that as the authority figure, you're automatically putting in that position of feeling at risk for violence. at a core level that they probably do not recognize themselves.
Yeah, and they may be very well intended in what they're trying to do with you. And I think it's still the problem that we have in terms of agency delivered support versus community-based support or peer-based support is that whenever it doesn't really matter how good the agency is, honestly, it doesn't. Just that alone, the fact that it's going to be an individual receiving support from, some outtime, it's still going to be perceived for the most part as an expert entity. And as soon as that happens, that's a power differential. There's no way around that. There's just no way around that. So it's about trying to find a different way to do the work. And I think that that's what we're trying to design here is, okay, let's try this more like a peer model. You know what I mean? Like, let's try to bring people together that are like us or have had similar lived experience. And let's talk about this and help them get in touch with their own inner experience and go from there. Yeah, I feel like it's very different than most of what I see that's being offered right now as trauma-informed support.
Yes.
So it's exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. It was great to have a conversation today.
Yeah, it was real. I could nerd out about this stuff all day and night. It's so great. I love it.
Again, because I'm sure we've had so many more conversations about a lot of these things.
Yeah, and I would love to, if you wanted to do a follow-up talk about how did it go and what were the challenges that we encountered that we didn't expect in terms of just like, I expect that there'll be things that were, ways in which it didn't work as we thought it may, and what may that have been about. Not with anybody's specifics, but I just think it'll be an interesting opportunity to reflect on how was it received, what would we do differently possibly, and that kind of thing. So
I think that would be a fabulous plan. Let's do that. We will do that in July after your workshop is done. Okay, that sounds great. So you can find out more about the upcoming Parenting with PTSD workshop that Dawn and Emily are putting on at hearthisnow.org. And you can find out about the services that Dawn and I offer at parentingwithptsd.com. We do, Emily and Dawn and I all offer speaking services. And I currently have a new offering of one-on-one mothering support for mothers who are survivors of childhood trauma. So again, the websites are hearthisnow.org and parentingwithptsd.com. Thanks for listening today, and be kind to one another and be kind to yourselves. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.